The world's longest undefended border has just become a digital frontline. We aren't talking about tanks or soldiers on the 49th parallel. We are talking about a multi-billion-dollar trade war that could bankrupt entire industries before the sun sets tomorrow. The friendly neighbor to the north? They just drew a line in the sand, and Silicon Valley is about to cross it. For decades, the relationship between Canada and the United States was the envy of the world, a seamless, integrated machine of commerce and culture. But today, in April 2026, that machine is grinding to a halt. The sparks flying from the friction are threatening to ignite a global splinternet. And if you think this is just about a small tax or a few content laws, you are missing the biggest shift in global power since the end of the Cold War. This is the story of how the special relationship broke and why the fallout will determine who owns the future of artificial intelligence. And to understand how we reached this breaking point, we have to look at the catalyst that turned a quiet trade partnership into a high-stakes digital standoff. It began with a single piece of paper in Ottawa, the Digital Services Tax, or DST. For years, the Canadian government watched as American tech titans, Google, Meta, Amazon, and Apple, extracted billions of dollars in revenue from Canadian users. These companies were part of the daily life of every Canadian, from the way they shopped to the way they consumed news. Yet through complex international tax loopholes, these giants were paying almost nothing into the Canadian treasury. In early 2025, the government, led by Prime Minister Mark Carney, decided that the era of the free ride was over. They implemented a 3% tax on the Canadian revenue of any large tech company, with global revenues exceeding 750 million euros. But it wasn't just the 3% that sent shockwaves through the boardrooms of Menlo Park and Mountain View. It was the retroactive clause. Canada demanded back taxes dating all the way back to 2022. Suddenly, the U.S. tech sector was handed a bill worth over $2 billion, and they were expected to pay it immediately. The reaction from Washington was nothing short of explosive. The Trump administration, back in power and operating on a platform of America First protectionism, viewed the DST not as a fair tax, but as a direct expropriation of American wealth. To the White House, Canada wasn't just asking for its fair share, it was discriminating against the most successful companies in human history. The response was a masterclass in economic escalation. Within weeks, the U.S. Trade Representative announced a Section 301 inches investigation, a legal tool usually reserved for aggressive trade adversaries like China. But the retaliation didn't stay digital for long. By the summer of 2025, the U.S. had imposed a 50% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum, striking at the heart of Ontario's industrial base. They followed up with a 25% tariff on all Canadian-built automobiles and a 35% tariff on softwood lumber. The message was clear: if you tax our bits, we will tax your atoms. As we move deeper into 2026, the conflict has evolved far beyond a dispute over tax revenue. It has become a war of ideologies over data sovereignty. For the United States, the internet is and should remain a borderless marketplace where the best algorithms win. But for Canada, the borderless internet has started to feel like digital colonialism. This sentiment was fueled by the implementation of Bill C-11 and Bill C-18. These laws were designed to protect Canadian culture and media in the digital age, requiring platforms like Netflix to prioritize Canadian content and forcing Meta and Google to pay Canadian news publishers for the links shared on their platforms. The American response was a digital blackout. Meta simply removed news from Facebook and Instagram for all Canadian users. Google threatened to pull its search engine from the country entirely. For the first time in history, Canadians woke up to a version of the internet that was smaller, more restricted, and fundamentally different from the one their American neighbors were using. This brings us to why this conflict matters on a global scale. Canada is currently acting as the canary in the coal mine for the rest of the world. Mid-sized economies from Brazil to Australia are watching this standoff with bated breath. If Canada, the U.S.'s closest ally and largest trading partner, can successfully tax American tech and maintain its own digital regulations, it provides a blueprint for every other nation to do the same. If Canada succeeds, the era of the global web is effectively over. We will move toward a fragmented internet, where each country has its own rules, its own taxes, and its own algorithmic filters. This is a nightmare for global investors because it shatters the scale that makes tech companies so profitable. If you have to build a different version of your product for every country, the costs skyrocket and innovation slows to a crawl. But there is a deeper layer to this war that is only now becoming clear in 2026, the race for sovereign AI. In January of this year, Canada officially launched its sovereign AI compute strategy. Prime Minister Carney's government realized that in the age of artificial intelligence, compute is the new oil. Currently, almost all of Canada's AI processing happens on servers owned by Microsoft, Amazon, or Google, all located on U.S. soil. This means that if the trade war escalates, the U.S. government could, in theory, order these companies to cut off Canada's access to the brains of the 21st century economy. To prevent this, Canada is investing $700 million into building its own domestic AI infrastructure. They are calling for the creation of massive 100-megawatt data centers that are owned and operated within Canadian borders, using Canadian-made hardware where possible. This isn't just about economic policy, it's about national security. Canada is trying to decouple its digital brain from Silicon Valley, ensuring that no matter how bad the trade war gets, Canadian hospitals, banks, and government agencies can still function. This shift towards sovereign AI has created a massive talent arms race. For decades, Canada was the world's AI laboratory. The pioneers of deep learning, like Geoffrey Hinton and Yoshua Bengio, did their groundbreaking work in Toronto and Montreal. But for years, the brain drain was a one-way street. Canada's best and brightest would graduate from the University of Waterloo or McGill and immediately move to the Bay Area for seven-figure salaries. In 2026, Canada is fighting to keep them home. Through the Canada Global Impact Plus initiative, the government is offering massive tax credits and research grants to any AI researcher who stays in Canada. They are also making it easier for global tech talent to move to Canada, positioning themselves as the stable, regulated alternative to the increasingly volatile and protectionist United States. While the tech war is being fought in data centers and parliamentary halls, the real-world impact is being felt in the Rust Belt towns of both nations. Because the North American supply chain is so integrated, these tariffs are like a circular firing squad. A car built in Ontario might cross the border 7 times before it's finished. Every time it crosses, it now gets hit with a 25% tariff. This has caused the price of a new Ford or GM vehicle to jump by nearly $10,000 for consumers on both sides of the border. In Windsor and Detroit, workers are being laid off not because of a lack of demand, but because the trade friction has made their factories unprofitable. This is the great irony of the tech war. To protect the digital economy, both governments are sacrificing the physical economy that has sustained them for a century. Now we must look at what happens next, and all roads lead to July 1st, 2026. This is the sunset date for the USMCA, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. When the deal was signed years ago, it included a mandatory 6-year review. In any other year, this would be a routine bureaucratic check-in. But in 2026, it is being treated as a doomsday clock. The Trump administration has signaled that they will not renew the agreement unless Canada completely scraps its digital services tax and its content regulations. Canada, meanwhile, has doubled down, stating that Canadian culture and economic sovereignty are not for sale. If the USMCA is allowed to expire, it would be the single largest economic disruption in North American history. We are talking about $1.90 trillion in annual trade that would suddenly be subject to most favored nation tariffs. The integrated North American market would shatter. But there is a second, even more dangerous scenario, the China pivot. In a stunning speech last month, the Canadian Minister of AI and Digital Innovation suggested that if the U.S. continues to treat Canada as a trade adversary, Canada may look to diversify its digital partnerships. This is a veiled threat to integrate Canadian tech infrastructure with standards used in the European Union or even China. Imagine a world where the U.S. closest ally uses a digital architecture that is intentionally incompatible with Silicon Valley. It would be a geopolitical earthquake that would leave the U.S. digitally isolated on its own continent. However, there is a third path, a North American digital bloc. Some trade analysts are calling for a digital USMCA that treats data, AI compute, and critical minerals as a shared, protected resource. Canada has the nickel, lithium, and hydroelectric power needed to run the AI revolution. The US has the chips and the capital. If they can stop fighting over a 3% tax, they could build a unified fortress North America that would be untouchable by any global rival. But as we stand here in April 2026, the rhetoric coming out of both capitals is getting louder, not quieter. The special relationship isn't just on life support, it's being rewritten in real time by algorithms and trade lawyers. To understand the sheer scale of the change, we have to look at the human cost of this digital divorce. Think about a small tech startup in Kitchener-Waterloo. In 2023, their goal was to get acquired by Google or move to San Francisco. In 2026, that path is blocked by a wall of regulation. They are now being forced to choose, stay in Canada and serve a market of 40 million people, or move to the U.S. and lose access to the sovereign AI grants that keep them afloat. For the average consumer, the tech war feels like a series of small, annoying inconveniences that are slowly adding up to a lower standard of living. Your favorite Netflix show isn't available because of content quotas, your Amazon deliveries are delayed by customs disputes, your AI assistant isn't as smart as the American version because it doesn't have access to the same training data. These are the digital scars of a trade war that is being fought in the background of our daily lives. As we move toward the July deadline, the tension is reaching a fever pitch. Wall Street is nervous, the Canadian loonie is volatile, and the tech giants are spending millions on lobbying to find a middle ground. But this isn't just about money anymore, it's about pride. It's about the fact that Canada no longer wants to be America's attic, and the U.S. no longer wants to be the world's tech support for free. The tech war is a symptom of a deeper reality. The world is getting smaller, and the rules-based order that governed the last 80 years is being replaced by digital mercantilism. If you want to know how this ends, don't look at the stock market. Look at the data centers being built in the Canadian Shield. Look at the trade lawyers poring over the USMCA sunset clause. And look at the way your own digital life is being sliced and diced by geographic borders that were never supposed to exist in cyberspace. For over a century, the bond between the United States and Canada was the gold standard for international friendship. But in the age of artificial intelligence, friendship is a luxury that neither side seems able to afford. The 49th parallel used to be just a line in the dirt. Now, it's a firewall, and it's starting to burn. This tech war is heating up, and as the clock ticks toward July 1st, 2026, we are realizing that this wasn't just a temporary spat between neighbors, it was the end of an era. The North American dream of a seamless, borderless continent is being replaced by a digital reality that is colder, harder, and much more expensive. What happens when the world's most successful trade partnership decides to divorce over a set of algorithms? We are about to find out. The Northern Front is no longer a hypothetical scenario, it is our current reality. Whether it ends in a digital union or a great decoupling will determine the trajectory of the 21st century. As the tension mounts and the July deadline approaches, one thing is certain, the internet as we know it is changing, and the peaceful border will never be the same. The battle for the future of North America isn't being fought with steel or oil, it's being fought with code. And the first digital casualty might just be the alliance that held the world together for 100 years. Consider the history of how nations have traditionally viewed their resources. In the 18th century, it was land and agricultural output. In the 19th, it was coal and steam. In the 20th, it was oil and manufacturing. Canada and the United States became the powerhouses they are today by mastering those physical domains together. But the 21st century has introduced a fourth domain, the information layer. This layer is composed of the data we generate, the compute power used to process it, and the AI models that turn that data into economic value. For the first 20 years of this century, the U.S. and Canada operated as if this information layer was a shared utility, like the air we breathe. But the digital services tax changed all of that. It was an admission that the information layer has a physical home, and that home is the balance sheet of a sovereign nation. Canada's insistence on the DST is rooted in a fundamental belief that a country's data belongs to its people. When a Canadian user clicks on an ad or searches for a product, they are creating raw material for American AI models. In the eyes of the Carney government, allowing that raw material to be exported for free is no different than allowing a foreign power to pump oil out of Canadian ground without paying a royalty. This digital royalty is what the DST represents. But to the U.S. tech lobby, this is a dangerous misunderstanding of how the digital economy works. They argue that the value isn't in the data, but in the refinement, the billions of dollars spent on R&D to build the platforms that make that data useful. They see the tax as a double dip, where Canada wants the benefits of the technology while simultaneously penalizing the people who built it. This philosophical divide is why a simple compromise has been so hard to reach. It's not just about the $2 billion in back taxes, it's about who has the right to regulate. If the U.S. allows Canada to set these precedents, they fear it will lead to a regulatory contagion that spreads through Europe and Asia. Already, we are seeing the European Union citing the Canadian model in their discussions about the next phase of the Digital Markets Act. This is why the U.S. has reacted with such disproportionate force. They aren't just trying to protect their revenue in Canada, they are trying to prevent the collapse of the entire global business model of Silicon Valley. As we look toward the final months of the USMCA review, the tech war is expanding into the world of finance and cryptocurrency. Canada has traditionally been a hub for crypto mining due to its cold climate and abundant hydropower. But as part of its sovereign AI strategy, the government has started to prioritize AI compute over crypto mining. New regulations have made it significantly more expensive for Bitcoin miners to operate in Canada, as the government seeks to divert that electricity toward the new 100-megawatt AI data centers. This has caused a massive migration of crypto firms from Canada to the southern United States, where energy regulations are more lax. This energy migration is yet another point of friction, as the U.S. accuses Canada of exporting its environmental footprint while hoarding its energy for strategic AI. The tech war is also bleeding into the world of aerospace and defense. With the rise of AI-driven drones and automated surveillance, the shared defense of North American airspace through NORAD is becoming increasingly complicated. If Canada is using sovereign AI to power its defense systems while the U.S. is using proprietary Silicon Valley models, how do the two systems talk to each other? There is a growing concern in the Pentagon that the tech war will lead to interoperability failures that could leave the continent vulnerable to external threats. The digital firewall at the border isn't just a barrier to trade, it's a potential gap in our collective security. This brings us back to the human element. For the millions of people who live in cross-border communities, like the Detroit-Windsor area or the Vancouver-Seattle corridor, the tech war feels like a betrayal. These are people whose families, businesses, and lives span both sides of the line. They are the ones paying the tariff tax on their groceries and their electronics. They are the ones who find their online social networks fragmented and their digital rights changing depending on which cell tower they are connected to. For them, the 49th parallel is no longer a peaceful border, it is a source of anxiety and economic uncertainty. As the sun sets on this analysis, we must realize that we are witnessing the birth of a new kind of conflict. The tech war doesn't look like the wars of the past. There are no dramatic battles, no clear winners or losers, and no peace treaty that can fix everything overnight. Instead, it is a war of attrition fought in the quiet halls of power and the humming rooms of server farms. It is a war that is being settled in the terms of service agreements we click every day without reading, and it is a war that will determine whether the next generation of North Americans grows up in a unified digital world or a fragmented one. The Northern Front is no longer a distant threat. It is here. It is now. And as the July 1st, 2026 deadline approaches, the entire world is watching to see if the two closest allies in history can find a way to share the future, or if they will allow the tech war to burn down the bridge that took a century to build. Don't look away, because whether you are in Toronto or New York, Seattle or Montreal, the fallout from this digital divorce will be waiting for you the next time you turn on your screen. The tech war is heating up, and we are all standing in the blast zone. As we conclude this deep dive, consider this. In the original NAFTA negotiations, the primary concern was where a physical car was made. In the 2026 USMCA review, the primary concern is where the car's brain is located. This shift is the most profound change in the history of international relations. It signals that we have officially moved from the industrial age to the intelligence age. And in this new age, the old rules of friendship and trade no longer apply. The tech war is just the beginning of a much larger struggle to define what a nation even is in a world made of data. The borders of the future won't be drawn on maps, they will be written in code. And as Canada and the U.S. are proving, those digital borders can be just as hard, just as cold, and just as dangerous as any wall ever built. Keep your eyes on the border, keep your eyes on the data, and most importantly, keep your eyes on July 2026. The future of North America is on the line, and the tech war is the first battle in a war that may never truly end.